Michele Barard is a New Orleans native and graduate of Agnes State College with a diverse background in software training, graphic design, writing, and editing. Her journey as an entrepreneur began in 2012 when she founded Urban Book Editor, LLC, to support urban authors in refining and publishing their work. Recognizing the growing need for strategic coaching and marketing support among writers and solopreneurs, she evolved her business into Michele A. Barard, LLC, expanding her services to include brand development, business coaching, and digital marketing. Having lived in Mexico and Central America for several years, Michele brings a global perspective to her work, helping authors and entrepreneurs build sustainable, profitable brands. She splits her time between New Orleans and Atlanta, where she writes, edits, and provides coaching to help her clients navigate the complexities of publishing, branding, and business growth. Learn more at www.michellebarard.com. Today, we're going to peek behind the curtain of Michele's life and experience and talk about why the only story that matters is the one you tell yourself, and how one voice evolving means that we tell our stories so other people find the courage to tell theirs. Please join us as we welcome Michele today. Okay, wonderful. And so with the only story that matters is the one we tell ourselves. That's true for our personal growth and development and evolution. But what I'm finding in season 3 of One Voice Evolving is that we are looking at resilience reimagined, because the unimaginable is happening in the stories we tell ourselves and the ones we've always believed to be true.
Mhm.
And so I'd like to maybe explore. We excel here at peeking behind the curtain of the academics and into the inner workings, and your mindset and your experience and your diversity will help us understand what it is you bring that can help women to reimagine what that story they're telling themselves wants to be, because when they find their story and they share it, it gives other women courage to find their stories.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
Well, and that's actually why I like the idea of working with women more. What's
okay.
really interesting is I started with more male clients, actually. And male clients because of the genres I was working with primarily. So when I first started my business, I started Urban Book Editor,
Okay.
and it was mostly urban, kind of gritty urban novels.
Uh-huh.
But over time, it became more memoirs, more self-help, more spiritual. So now there's a better balance, I think.
Mhm.
And then through my own personal experiences in recent years in particular, I really have been focused on working with women more, because I think we have stories that aren't shared the way that we would share them. Everybody's got their perspective, right? And those are valid. But I think women telling their own stories is really important. Black women in particular,
Right.
telling our own stories is really important. And fortunately, we have a rich history of telling our stories with women like Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou and so forth. But I think that now technology has democratized publishing so much that
Mhm.
we have the ability to learn from other women who are really just like us. They haven't gone on to be Nobel Prize winning authors and things like that, you know?
Yeah. And in that story, there is our own healing, and there is the cultural healing, and there is the legacy piece for our women over 40, our market here. It is a legacy project. What do you want your grandchildren to know about how you contributed to their lives in this space and time?
Well, and it's funny you mention that, because when I was doing my podcast, Somewhere in the Middle with Michele Barard, that's one of the things that I used to say, kind of a, I don't know, paraphrasing of an African proverb. We're only here because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And as I've gotten older, because I'm an empty nester now,
Mhm.
well into my 50s, I feel like I have more of a responsibility because I've learned so many things
Mhm.
over the years that I think that I and women my age need to share our stories also to share with the younger women,
Mhm.
the ones who are thinking that they're the first ones going through it.
Right. Yeah. And how do let's talk for a minute about that midlife transition.
Mhm.
Because we have women over 40 who are maybe just beginning to empty nest or just beginning to consider, and who was I before I started this family vibe, and who
Mhm.
am I going to be next?
Mhm.
And in that moment, we have an intersection of resources and creativity and awareness that we did not have time or energy for when we were busy running soccer practices and all of the things. Now, did you experience some of that as part of your shift?
Well, I think for me, it was really interesting because I had gone from my mom's house to my dad's house, then to a college campus, living in a dorm. Then I got married. So I was living with my then husband. Then we had kids. So after divorce, I was living with kids. I had never lived alone. So when I finally did become an empty nester a couple years back, I didn't know what it was to be in a space by myself. I didn't know what it was to not have to make dinner, make
Mhm.
sure other people ate. Well, I do have a dog, so I have to make sure Abby eats, but I could eat whatever. Okay, I'm going to scramble an egg and call it a night. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? I noticed my dinners got very simple because it was a production. I had 3 kids at 3 different schools at one point, and
Mhm.
Atlanta's a big city.
Yes.
So that commute sometimes was 2.5, 3 hours, depending on the day and who had an accident.
Mhm.
So I had a very structured way of living. That's how I was able to grow a business while I was working full time and raising 3 kids. But it involved making groceries Sunday morning, cooking all day Sunday, having the majority of the meal ready, coming home from work, prepping a salad or a vegetable, getting everybody fed, all of those things. All of a sudden, I could just throw a chicken breast in a skillet and have a salad and I was done. I didn't have all of that planning to do. And it really did free me up
Mhm.
for a lot of self-reflection. That's really what it freed me up for. And I think that was the important thing for me because I'd already been doing the business. I'd already been grinding. That's just the Atlanta way. Everybody grinds here.
Yeah.
But being able to slow down and really spend more time with myself,
Right.
that was the key.
Yeah. And when I empty nested, the
Mhm.
two things that I loved and was surprised by the most is A, how nice it was to come to a home that was the way I left it.
Yeah.
Wow, that was awesome. And we could have nice things around here. And B, how much disposable income I had because I didn't realize that everybody's needs came before mine anyway. And I was the one who was not having nail polish so you could get your nails done. Right?
Right, right. Well, I mean, my situation is a little bit different because I actually, right after I became an empty nester,
Mhm.
I was assaulted and robbed by someone I was uh, associated with. And that really threw me for a loop emotionally.
Right.
And in the process of trying to heal from that, I lost my job and was basically starting over again,
Mhm.
after the layoff. So I actually took a pay cut, a significant pay cut,
Mhm.
and I couldn't work on the business. I was basically unable to work really at the level that I was accustomed to working for 2 years while I was trying to build myself back up. after that assault. And, because I'd never been through anything like that, where someone's holding a gun to your head and making you transfer all your money to them and stuff like that. It was like,
That's traumatic.
it took so long for me to feel normal again, right? To feel kind of settled in my own skin again. And so I actually had to step back career-wise. So there is not a lot of disposable income right now. Everything is covered and I'm rebuilding. But that's what I mean by the time to reflect. For me, what I needed more than anything else was that time to really kind of settle into myself again and heal emotionally and physically, because it was a physical assault. But the career piece is, I don't want to say it's less important now, but I have a different sense of myself. Where before, because of the kids, especially, I was like, got to grind it out, got to grind it out, got to grind it out. They've got things to do, got to put people through school, etc. Now I have to say, no, I have to spend more time taking care of myself, because if I don't take care of myself, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to be here to take care of them anyway. And they're grown, they're adults now. I still have one that's college age, but I have to think about things differently. And it really did force me to refocus. And that's really important. I think that's the piece that moms in particular, but women in general, tend to miss, is while you're putting them first, so that you're not buying. The only time I would buy myself clothes is if I happen to be out buying something for the kids and I saw something extremely on sale.
I hear you.
Now it's like, oh, I need a pair of jeans. I need to get my jeans. I can't walk around here with holes in my jeans.
Right.
But I used to, I did that for my kids. I'll walk around with holes in my jeans so that they don't have to.
Yeah.
And I think women sacrifice themselves so much.
Right. How many women have you met who have a story or have always imagined the writing a book or thought about it, and then and then we get busy or distracted or convince ourselves nobody wants to hear it anyway? And how do you coach them through taking that first baby step? And what is that first baby step?
You know what? By the time people get to me, oftentimes they've made the choice to write their book.
Okay.
I do have one client who has come to me off and on for years. It's a man, though, who has started a book, but he's never been able to finish it. And I think that the challenge is we get so nervous about being vulnerable. Writing is an extremely vulnerable profession. If you decide you're going to write, really write, it doesn't matter if you're writing a business book, doesn't matter if you're writing self-help, doesn't matter if you're writing fiction, whatever you're writing, you have to be so vulnerable. Not just in your writing itself, but also just the fact that you have to put yourself out there to get people to read your writing. And I think that's where people get stuck, based on what I've seen over the years. Doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, that's really the place where people get stuck. And I'm not sure what the best first step is. I know that one of the steps, though, is to find like-minded individuals to work with, whether that's a writing group that you go to. Most local libraries have writing groups that you can join. You don't have to read your work out loud at first, but if you go often enough and listen to other people and you just participate, even just by actively listening, you will eventually get the courage to share your work and get that feedback. And I think that's really the part that's scariest for people. And that's one easy way, relatively easy way to kind of get over that hump. And then another thing is, make sure that you're gathering a team, right? If you're going it alone and you just don't think that you can do it, go ahead and look for an editor to work with you on that developmental piece. If that's where you really want to go, if you're willing to invest in that. I mean, nobody can work for free. So I'm not going to say you're going to find a free resource necessarily, but if you're willing to invest in yourself and in sharing your story, if you think your story is worth telling, I say get an editor to work with you. One of my favorite authors that I've worked with, he actually came to me wanting to edit a book it was his memoir, but it was really just for his kids, for his immediate family.
Yep.
And I remember getting the memoir and reading it and going, I think you've got something you can sell here. This is not a story that you should only give to your family. His name is Bernard Lee, by the way, Bernard Lee Jr. He has a book called A Look Back in Time, and it's available on Amazon. He's actually got 2 volumes, and it's a series of vignettes about his life growing up as a military brat in the 1950s and 60s. And what's really amazing is, for me, he was a Black military brat, right? At a time when, the Army had kind of desegregated, but he was moving across from, I think at one point, Texas, DC, all these different places, and then eventually went to Germany. And he experienced life in a way that I wasn't accustomed to. He's a little bit older than I am. So I learned things about the Black experience that I didn't know. I didn't learn about the Green Book, but I learned about Black people needing to keep family ties much more tightly. Because if they were trying to travel from, let's say, Texas to New York or DC, they couldn't stay in most hotels. I had no idea of this, because by the time I came along, I went to hotels.
And what do you think for the author? And let's take him as an example. What did telling his story and having it validated by you as an editor, what did that do for him and the story he tells himself?
I don't know the story that Bernard tells himself, so I don't want to try and crawl into somebody else's head. But what I do think that it did was it gave him the realization that he had knowledge beyond what he thought he had. He already had a vibrant career. He volunteered as a chess coach for young people in the school district where he lived in here in Georgia. He knew he had knowledge to share, but I don't think he realized initially that his personal experience was teaching a combination of resilience and history and just a world that some of us never knew. Thank goodness, right?
Yeah. And I think until you start putting your stories onto paper, I always say writing makes it real. Because and writing is the most painful. I would rather throw up, and I hate to throw up, than to write, honestly, because it always comes with tears and anguish and all the things, every fear factor it can be. But when I get through all of that, what it does is it solidifies, it makes it real. And it can become then, even if it's a trauma response or a trauma story, it can become then, I can become the observer of a fact of my life instead of a participant in the drama. Does that make sense?
It does. It really does. And I would say less that it's that it becomes real, but more that it gives you a way to process. So that's what that 2 years after the assault did for me. It was really my time to process all of that so that I could become the observer. Because initially, right after it happened, it was nothing but drama, is what I want to say. Nothing but drama. For 2 years, we had trials and delays. It was actually very made for TV movie, if I may say so, in terms of, I was rescued by a SWAT team. It was really a wild story. And I'm glad that I can kind of laugh and smile about it now, because I'm like, well, I have had an extraordinary life, haven't I? But at the time that it happened, there was so much turmoil. And, you know, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize my face because I was battered. And one of the things he did was he choked me multiple times, cut off my oxygens. And if you've ever watched SVU, Law and Order SVU, which I love the show, I love police procedurals, but they talk about petechial hemorrhaging, I think, on the show. They're talking about when the whites of your eyes, the blood vessels burst.
Right.
I had so much of that in fact, the forensic nurse who takes all this evidence after a crime couldn't believe, she's like, I can't see the whites of your eyes. I've never seen that level of hemorrhaging in the eyes. So I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror. And then we had the trial, and, you know, the person calling me and saying, this was, you know, come get me. No, what do you, are you on drugs? No. You know? So there was months and months of that drama. I had to change my phone number so folks couldn't call me, all kinds of things like that going on. And then just the social media, all kinds of things. And finally, I was able to, over time, detach. And that's what your writing did for you, was it helped you to detach so that you could look at it and say, yeah, that happened. Yeah. And it's okay that happened. And I accept my responsibility for my part in it. Right. So for me, there's certain people I shouldn't have let into my life. Yeah. There are other decisions that I could have done differently that could have avoided this. I could have moved more quickly when I felt like I was in danger. There are all kinds of things I could have done. And I can look back now and say, well, that happened, and that's okay. And it doesn't define you. It's just another thing that happened in your life. Just like the good things that happened, like the days when my 3 babies were born. Each of those days was amazing. Yeah. You know, graduating from college, various things that you remember happily, you know, birthdays and celebrations and quiet times. And yeah, there's this other thing too. Right. Yeah.
So when you were going through that, did you journal or do any writing or process it some other way? And have you written anything about it since?
I am working on a book.
Okay.
And I did do some writing. I am not, what's funny is I am not a journaler naturally. That has never been my natural tendency. I tend to write prose or poetry.
Okay.
And I record dreams. That's the other thing. I record my dreams. But I have never been one to just journal. I did journal a little about this. What I mostly did was I meditated and I practiced yoga. And I let myself feel things, which is difficult if you've been just grinding through life for 30 years, 30 plus years. But that was part of that healing process. For a while, I went back to my hometown, New Orleans, and I went to church every day almost. And it wasn't to go to mass. It was, I mean, I went to mass, but it was to be in that environment that was very familiar to me. And I love churches, mosques, synagogues, temples. I love all of them. I think they're so beautiful. The architecture and the design elements, particularly old churches. So, you know, that's what I did. And it was just comforting to me. And I focused on getting myself well.
And so during this process, when did you switch your business to your brand name?
Oh, actually, I started Urban Book Editor in 2012, and right before the pandemic, I
Okay.
decided to change the name to Michele Barard LLC. And
Mhm.
that was because I found that I had been working with authors in more than just an editing capacity for years. I've been helping them with their websites because I come from a tech background.
Mhm.
So I've been building websites for them. I've been helping with marketing plans and things of that nature, doing coaching and courses. So that change, I want to say, was about 2018, 2000,
Okay.
toward the end of 2018.
Mhm. Yeah. And so has this thing that occurred with you been since between 2018 and now?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
2021. That was right before Thanksgiving, 2021.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's all right. So now let's talk about your business where you are today. And
Okay.
what is it that lights you up about what you do?
Oh, wow. What lights me up the most is being able to hear a client say, that was so helpful.
Uh-huh.
That really helped me. Thank you so much. That helped me. Because here's what I believe. I believe that it is our job to share what we know whenever possible.
Mhm.
And if I know something, I don't typically keep it hidden. You know how some people like to hoard information? I
Yeah.
don't believe in that. If I know something, you ask a question, I'm going to give you the answer if I have it. If I don't have it, I'll help you find it.
Uh-huh.
And that's just the approach I've taken throughout my career. That's how I tried to handle things with my kids. I wasn't a big one of those parents who believed in lying to kids very much. I mean, you have to lie to them occasionally. They don't need to know everything you did when you were a kid.
Right.
But I believe in sharing knowledge. So that is probably the thing that lights me up the most is when my clients feel like they have benefited from the information I'm sharing with them and the things that we're doing together.
Mhm. Yeah. And then when they go through, now, do you walk them all the way through the publishing process?
I can, yeah. It depends on where they are when they come to me. I mean, some people come to me when they just have a manuscript and it's ready to be edited. I do
Mhm.
much less editing now,
Okay.
but some come with their manuscript and it still needs to be edited. I do layout and cover design, some cover design. I'm not an illustrator. So if they want illustrator work, I have to refer them to someone else. But I
Mhm.
can do interior layout and cover design. I
Mhm.
help with website design and I do book marketing plans. So I can help them with that. Also with now that I'm not doing my podcast anymore right now, I've also been helping people with booking podcasts so that
Okay.
they can get a little more exposure that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were doing your podcast, what did that do for you? Because for
Oh,
me, I've learned and grown so much. Oh my God,
mhm.
best thing ever.
That's really what it is, right?
Yeah.
You get to interact with people you maybe didn't know before,
Mhm.
and you get to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And like I said, you find out you're more alike than you are different.
Mhm.
And hopefully that message gets out to your audience as well. And if they learn something practical along the way as well, that's great.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just the message that, you know what, we're more similar than we are different. And all of this division that we see in our society is a figment of our imaginations.
Right.
Sometimes that's the key point. At least for me, that was one of the key points.
So I have a question for you. You know, at One Voice Evolving, we are advancing racial equity in our lifetime. And this is my target market is white women who are inclined to want to do that and are afraid of doing it wrong or making a mistake. Or so I'm leading by example, here's how you step on it and step out of it, and it's okay. But in that, do you find in the publishing field or in your editing work that there are barriers to entry for Black and brown people that may not exist for people with this skin color? And where would we find that, and how would we know how systemic it is?
Here's what I would say. I think that publishing is a tough business in general,
Okay.
partly because there's so many gatekeepers. There's so many people who do want to tell their stories that
Mhm.
try for years to get in through the traditional publishers
Yeah.
and never do.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I observed, I work primarily with Black authors. And that's partly because so many of us self-publish.
Okay. All
Why
right.
do we self-publish? Well, it's hard to, the gatekeeping is hard enough, right? But when you also look at the marketplace, you can see that most of the authors are white, at least in the US, right?
Mhm.
White men.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
That's just what it is.
Uh-huh.
Especially in certain areas, business and memoir, you're seeing a lot of women writing memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, you have a lot of celebrity females that are sharing their stories. But yeah, I think it's challenging for anybody trying to go through publishing, but the sheer numbers, right? So Black Americans make up about 14% of the US population.
Mhm.
I don't think we make up 14% of the traditionally published
Right.
authors. I would have to do some research on that to
Sure.
be sure. But self-publishing is a viable route. Hybrid publishing is a viable route. And I think it's probably our best route to get our stories out there. And these days, traditional publishing is very difficult for everyone. If you're
Right.
not a brand name already,
Well, and you have to already have, your bazillion followers in order
that's
to
why.
even get the main publisher house attention.
Exactly.
I
And
think.
that's why. And I think that's a shame. But that's why I love technology, because it really democratizes communication overall.
Mhm.
And in this case, publishing. It democratizes it tremendously. So you can go out and find your audience. You can find your target audience easier now than ever before with the internet.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it does take effort.
Right. So talk to me about do your authors or any of them use AI either as a muse or as an editor or as a writer? And is that becoming more of a thing? And what does that do to mm, the publication? Is that different if you have AI assistants in writing?
So far, no, I haven't worked with anyone who
Okay.
has worked with AI for their book.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a fan of AI
Uh-huh.
in many ways.
Mhm.
I think that it's really helpful because if you work in a vacuum, like if you're by yourself,
Yep.
you don't have a lot of support, you can actually use the AI bot to bounce ideas off of. And
Yeah.
because it's got all of this knowledge that it's been trained on, it can tell you, oh, this sounds like a good idea for your story, or maybe you would consider this. You can even ask it, does this idea, um, would that jibe with this audience, this particular audience, right? So there are things you can do with the AI that I think are really valuable, especially if you're working by yourself, you don't feel like you have that support yet.
Right.
But I haven't run into anyone who's willing to to work with it. People have been curious about it though. I was actually thinking about doing a little course on
Right.
using AI because I think folks are interested, but they're
Mhm.
wary.
I think when I have found it useful is what used to be called writer's block.
Hmm.
It just wasn't coming, and I could sit here for my 3 hours every day and I got nothing. And I used to talk about a muse, but I always had to wait for that muse to show up
Hmm.
at will. And turns out I've got adult ADHD, I'm sure. And sometimes the muses have their own little party going on. And what AI has allowed me to do is brainstorm with myself,
Yeah, that's
if that makes
exactly
any sense.
that's
And it's
exactly
enough to give me a thread or a thought that came from me
it. Hmm.
that I didn't see because there were too many competing noises.
Yep. And that's what I think it's good for. It's
Yeah.
really good for kind of running ideas by it.
Hmm.
What do you think of this? How do you, well, and of
Even
course,
market research.
it's not a person, so it doesn't have an opinion per se, but based on that information in its database and whatever it can search, if you have one that's capable of search,
Mhm.
yeah, it can give you some opinions.
Right. Well, and if you use it for very long, I just did some work in Georgia, actually, for about 2 months. And I was on the road. And so I was, working by day in culture and communications. And by night I was working on my podcast and my book writing. And about 2 a.m. when I would be overwhelmed with something, I started I use Justice AI, and I started talking to her like a BFF. Look, I am burned out and I'm over this and just bitch, 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 whatever it was. She got to know my voice and my inner workings in such short order that now when I say, and give it my brand voice today is nothing like it was 6 months ago when I was just using Chat GPT with whatever the pre-programmed was.
Yeah.
It is she's my BFF, my coach in a box. She's all kind of thing. And but she is not my editor, and she is not a ghostwriter.
Right. So here's the thing too. Sometimes they can help in other capacities. So let's say you started working on, and I don't want to call it an editor, but let's say you've been working on a little blurb about your book. You can give it to them and say, what do you think? Can you punch this up for me? What am I missing? What should be in there? You know what I've been working on. Let's talk about this. And they can make suggestions. You might improve it by adding this, this, and this.
Right. Yeah. That'd be a short little thing you could do for potential authors. Do you blog or anything on your website? Do you have sources? Okay.
Yeah.
So if people wanted to learn more about what working with you would be like, where do they go?
Well, I actually put something together just for your audience specifically.
Okay, that's exciting. All right, let's hear
Well,
it.
no, because one of the things that a lot of people have trouble with, they may write the book and edit the book and feel fine with the publishing process because that's kind of a checklist of things to do for the most part, right? But where most people have trouble is with the marketing. So I developed a couple of courses. One is called Publishing Path Blueprint, and the next course is called Marketing Plan Blueprint. And I wanted to give a free sample, a little mini course to your audience, and they can access it at a bit.ly link. It's bit.ly, bit.ly /MPB One Voice.
That's so sweet.
So that's for the Marketing Plan Blueprint mini course.
Okay.
But your audience can also find me at my website, michelebarard.com. That's Michele with one L, BARARD.com. They can also find me on all the social medias as Urban Book Editor.
Oh, nice. That's wonderful. So tell me, in your travels, as we're starting to wrap up a little bit, what do you think your authors, who happen to be women over 40 who are looking at telling their stories in whatever capacity, how does writing help their resilience, or let's marinate in that for a minute.
Yeah, well, first of all, you don't get to be over 40 without developing some resilience.
Right. Not as a woman.
Not as a woman. I mean, there's so many things that we deal with in family and career, just day to day, that we have to develop a certain amount of resilience. What I think, there are two things I want to say here. One is about the writing process. It's just like you used your writing process to kind of pull all that emotion up, and then you could look at it and get a clear picture of who you are in that moment, or who you were in that moment as those things were happening. There's that healing process that can take place with writing for you personally. And when you said that you were crying and all of this, that's how you know you're doing it right. If you don't cry, nobody else will.
Yes.
Right? If you don't cry when you're writing it, nobody will cry when they're reading it. And I took that, I had heard that before, And then I really took it to heart. When my oldest daughter got married, she asked me to write a speech. And as I wrote this speech, I found myself crying. And every time I practiced saying the speech, I found myself crying. And I had to keep practicing until I stopped crying. And then I said it at the wedding and I cried anyway. But that's how you know you're there and you're being vulnerable and you're giving. And people feel that in your writing. They know when you're giving and when you're not. And I think that that's healing, not just for you as the writer, but the second part of what I wanted to say is that it's healing for the reader.
Yeah. Yes. And so that resilience gets passed. Yeah. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Do you have any other things that we coulda, shoulda, woulda talked about during this time that you were hoping to cover?
No, I just wish I knew more about what's going on with you right now. What are you working on right now?
Oh my God. I am actually. I've been doing this podcast for a year. We are entering season 3. We've had 45 amazing guests. You are going to be one of the first 5 of season 3, which will start into May. And we started out being One Voice Evolving, reclaiming joy in DEI, because I was working with women who were burning out in the DEI work. That was when you could still say DEI. Then we had election cycle, and I switched it in season 2 to Resilience Redefined, because we had to rethink everything. But now, 100 days in, we are reimagining, because it's like the house is on fire. It's not like you're ever going to go pull out your computer and it's going to work the way it did. So we have to reimagine. We're starting from scratch in ways we didn't even know. And I'm bringing in different voices that I normally would into the space. And a lot of what appears to be evolving to me for season 3 is somatic healing.
Yeah.
So much of this is about permission to pivot, permission to rest, permission to speak, but it is about permission
Yeah.
we give ourselves. It is the programming we have that keeps us silent, and silence does not keep us safe. And so if we're going to reimagine this thing, we've got to rewrite the script for the whole world. Fresh slate, you know?
I think that's really interesting because, there's this trend that people are talking about Black women resting right now. And I remember the first time around.
Yes.
And the first time around, I remember thinking, there is no way that this is going to get past Iowa. And when it got past Iowa, I was like, I cannot give energy to this because I know this is going to come to pass. And I stopped right then. No more getting involved in social media discussions or anything like that. I don't do much of that to begin with. But I remember commenting, oh, I don't think this is going to get past Iowa, no worries. And I was like, wow. And it really showed me something interesting about the country, or a segment of the country that I didn't realize felt so frustrated. That's the word I'm going to use. I don't know if that's the best word, but that's the one I'm going to use. And I have a client right now that I've been working with for a little over almost 2 years now. And sweet guy, but it's given me some very interesting insights into that way of thinking for people who support this. And my only concern at this point is that so many people don't realize, it's almost like they can't see the pattern. I'm like, if you studied history at all, you should see the pattern. But Americans as a group, we have a very short memory.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because we're all grinding so hard just to keep a roof over our heads, or if it's because we're always focused on being entertained. I'm not sure what it is about this particular culture. I mean, I've lived in a couple of Latin American countries. I've traveled a little bit. I've seen a different understanding of history.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen the United States from outside the country, you know, watching the news in Mexico, watching the news in Guatemala. Just, I was in Oaxaca, Mexico when the second Gulf War started.
Oh,
No, was it which one was GW?
that was, I want shock and awe.
Maybe it was the first Gulf War, whichever one started in 1991.
Desert Storm,
Was it Desert Storm? There's so many Gulf Wars now.
right?
1991 when the war started, and I was in Oaxaca, Mexico, and I was watching people protest in that time, at that time, small town. I don't know if it still is, in the Zocalo, which is a town square,
Yeah.
protesting the start of this war.
Mm-hmm.
And watching the news and hearing the people, and just that perspective being so different.
Yes.
You know, and I wish that more Americans had the opportunity to experience that, because then they may have a slightly more nuanced view of certain things. You know, but I think the work that you're doing is important, because it's not just about DEI, it's really about the future of the country in so many ways.
Well, and I did not know. I mean, I wasn't political when I started this. I'm just an HR person. And and I've become more political to the point now that I can't seem to get away with it. So I said to Justice AI, here's a fun fact. I don't know if you can see this.
A little bit.
Yeah, I can't get it. A little to the left. Notes from a recovered Republican. I said to Justice AI the other day, just for the shits and grins, I said, all right, based on what you know about me, what do you think I look like, and what should a book title be?
Mhm.
That's what she popped out.
I love it.
I was so taken aback, because I met my husband in 2020. I am, yes, remarried at this late stage of the game, and he is a godsend to me. But I'm telling you, I was as Republican as he was liberal. And I had my concealed weapon, and I had all the things, and he would introduce, when we started dating, he would introduce me to his friends, because they all thought it was a hoot that he would hook up with a Republican. Oh my God. And so I wrote a Substack yesterday based on that. I wrote a little Substack that kind of detailed something I had written in 2020 around Trump that is more germane and important now than it was when I did, but it was what shifted me, and I called it a little to the left.
Wow.
It shifted me a little to the left, because I always thought I was moderate anyway, but I sure as hell was not. But I did live in this little protected white bubble. And when I started working with Dr. Nikki Lanier, now almost 2 years ago, her question, what has racism cost you?
Mm.
Me, white woman, me,
Yeah.
old white woman personally, what had it cost me? And when I sat down and really let that in and felt that, what came up from my soul was everything, everything that said, I know that I am protected and I don't have to do this work. And I built accountability into my life in that moment to make sure that I didn't step back into the comfort zone when it got difficult.
Yeah.
And it's only getting more difficult. And with each guest I meet, I become braver and bolder and more willing to be seen. And I practice what to do with trolls. And I'm old, and I have far fewer F's to give now about what happens to me than I did when I was raising children I had to be responsible for.
Yeah.
And if I'm going out, honey, I'm going out with a fight. And this whole idea of being an ally or an advocate or a whatever, I'm on the front lines. I don't, and I love, and I was passionate about this in a previous podcast when I said the best thing Black women ever did for us, ladies, was step back and say, you guys need to get your shit together. Because we never would have and never will as long as somebody else is going to take the fall. But with all these protests happening, I love that it is a sea of old white people. Okay, I don't care. It's your damn turn.
Mhm. I think it's really interesting that you said that because, first of all, 50 plus, zero F's to give. That's literally what I tell my kids with on a regular basis. I have so few F's to give. It is amazing. But so when I was in college, I went to a small women's liberal arts school here in Georgia called Agnes Scott College.
Okay.
And I didn't know what I was walking into. When I got accepted, I was like, yay, that's awesome. And then later, someone gave me a copy of Atlanta Magazine where they had been written up about some racism issues that had happened on campus.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, I'm stepping into this. And so when I first walked in, they were in the middle of having, talks and groups and all kinds of things like that. And somehow I ended up being one of those people on campus that I guess I didn't know when to shut up. People say I talk too much. So that's natural. But at some point I got invited. There were a couple of us, students and faculty and different folks invited to participate in a workshop by a group called that did an Undoing Racism workshop. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They were based out in New Orleans, actually.
Mhm.
And I think it was something Up for the People or something like that. I forget the name of the organization. When I say this workshop was so intense, and what it did that was absolutely beautiful was it gave us a vocabulary to discuss all of these things, a framework that we didn't really have. And it challenged everyone. I would go back I think it was over a whole weekend. I went back to my dorm room exhausted afterwards. But it was one of the most gratifying things to do with some of my white classmates. And I think that people sometimes underestimate how important it is to have not just Black women doing stuff. Yeah, we're mouthy sometimes. We talk too much. We say whatever's on our mind, whatever. But it's really being able to engage with each other. That's where the change comes in.
Yeah. Yes. And for me, what I'm doing is creating white women leaders to lead other white women into that space, because in the beginning, they will hear things from me they won't hear from you.
Yeah.
And so, by the way, will all those white men who are making all the rules.
Well, we'll see, because they don't seem to like to listen to women in general, but
Not anymore. No.
But what I love is I love seeing that, and I don't know if I do watch certain videos, for a while it was just F around and find out kind of videos.
Yeah.
But now I'm seeing much more of Republican leaders at the local and state levels in particular asking questions.
Right.
So like one I saw earlier today while I was cleaning was, I think it was a school board type thing. It was a short, so I didn't have all the details on it. But where this female was legislator or a council person was asking a male on that dais why he was changing the rules for some of their human sexuality courses and taking out information about consent, the importance of consent and how consent works. And another was asking, well, why did you do this? Do you have expertise in this area? I'm unaware of you having expertise. And just having these questions being put out there to some of these white male lawmakers is going to change things, because it's not, and having it televised, having it on YouTube and on streaming services and on the news, all of these things hopefully will change things. My concern is that if people can watch white women being dragged out of town hall meetings by private security with no legal authority to do that for no apparent reason, aside from her having a discussion with in that case, the sheriff.
Right.
Who knows what else they could allow? What else could they let happen?
Right.
And that's where my concern comes in is white women were the most protected of all of us.
Yes.
And if that can happen to a white woman in a public place and nobody steps up for it. I did hear later that one man did try to discourage the behavior. I don't know if he actually jumped in and started to fight with anybody. I didn't see that on any of the videos that I saw, but.
Well, I know she's got a $5 million suit and they've all been charged. So that was the good news. You know,
That is the good news, but we also
something.
know that our legal system is compromised.
Right?
That's the challenge. So, it's like, hopefully.
That's why we have to reimagine the resilience that we have built. It's like those are really great training wheels, folks.
Yeah.
But now those training wheels have to come off because they taught you to keep your balance within certain bumpers.
Yeah.
But there's no bumpers. And now, is this where you're going to fly? Because we have to reimagine what's possible when everything that we thought was the way the world operated doesn't operate that way anymore. Where there is without hope, without vision, the people perish. Okay. And where there's breath, there's hope. So I'm holding on to hope and I'm working actively every day to find reasons to believe.
Well, as long as you're doing that, I know there are other people doing it. I feel good about that. And we can only do what we can do in our little corners of the world.
Yeah.
And that's really how we contribute,
And it really is those baby steps. When Black women step back, I would be so afraid. I would be so afraid for them to be on any front line at any given point now. There's no reason in the world. And we have in our family, we are interracially tied generationally. No, stand back is the right thing to do. You did your part. It's our turn.
Yeah. Well, I am grateful for you all doing that because I think it really also shows us that we can trust you at a higher level.
Yeah, if only you could tell which of those 42% belong to which body. I'm just gonna, after that election was the first time I ever stepped out my door in my white bubble and went, I don't know which one of you bitches I can trust. So I'm not trusting any of you.
I ask honestly, you have worked an entire career in HR.
Yes.
And yes, you undoubtedly in corporate America have seen women that you cannot trust, white, Black, whatever.
Yeah.
You know them.
It just doesn't take very long. That's what I learned. That day I stepped out after the election, I was blown away. I did not expect the outcome we had. But you don't have to talk to somebody very long before you see who they are.
Yeah.
And once they show you, believe them.
Yeah.
And that is the healing of my trauma stuff, is to go trust your intuition and quit talking yourself out of what your body is so clearly trying to say to you.
And isn't that really what all healing is?
Yes. Yes. Which is why we're going back to that somatic healing, because your body already knows.
Yeah.
And
that's what I mean. I didn't move fast enough. I knew there was a problem.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell exactly. Well, I because of relationships with men in the past, I'm like, oh yeah, no. I gotta move. I gotta get out of this. This is not the thing. I didn't move quickly enough.
Yep.
Because I let other things get in the way, like, oh, I have to be at work today, so I cannot do X and us, that kind of thing. Yeah. Always trust your gut. Always put wellness and your safety above anything else. And if your career, your job, your whoever is being a blocker to that, that's where you got to get rid of one of those F's. You got to tell them to F off, because
Yeah.
it could literally, in my case, it almost literally got me killed, that I was trying to balance things that really shouldn't have mattered at that point. Because
Well, and resilience and regrets kind of go hand in hand. Because, and if the regrets in my life have always been because I stayed longer than I should have. I
Thank you.
never regretted leaving, but I always regretted staying for more damage.
Yeah, exactly. And that it doesn't matter if it's a relationship, if it's a job, it doesn't matter. I used to know, I'm gonna tell you how funny it is about the somatic piece of this. Early in my career, I remember I was working for this company. I loved my job. And I was working with this group of women that was very distressing. And my body knew it before my mind did. I started getting strep throat.
Right.
And I got strep throat, and then I would go to the doctor, get antibiotics, get over the strep throat. A few weeks later, I would get strep throat again. And I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea. This went on for, I'm gonna say, about 4 cycles. So that was probably about 4 months. And it got to the point where I had to justify me being out sick. Oh, you need a doctor's note. What do you mean? You don't believe me that I'm sick? I've never been irresponsible in my job. That's never been a thing for me. If anything, I work too much for you people. But it got to that point because I kept getting sick. And that's when I started realizing, oh, I'm getting sick because this job sucks on a certain level. And it wasn't until then that I realized, oh, okay, my body's trying to tell me I don't belong here. The thing is, when you get busy, so at that time I had 1 baby. Later, by the time you have 2 babies, or in my case, 3 babies, you're not focused on yourself in that same way.
Right.
I was still young enough and still into myself enough to pay attention, say, wait, something's wrong. And then, of course, then something happened at work. I'm like, oh, that's what that's about. I could catch the clue and then move on. By the time you get older, you're more just embroiled in life. It's hard to keep that connection sometimes. And that's where the meditation came in. When I started meditating again, when I started really focusing, I used to wake up at 5 in the morning so that I could meditate before the kids got up. That's when things started to smooth out for me again. And I could check in with myself. And that's what I would encourage every single woman out there. Doesn't matter if you want to write or not, forget about that. This is about you and your self-care. And I am of the opinion that if we individually and collectively meditate and get balanced, and that's really all prayer is a form of meditation. So hopefully the Christians won't get mad at me when I say that, but it really is. I grew up Catholic. I believe in prayer. It's a way of centering yourself and connecting with that higher energy, whether you call it God or universe, what have you. I am of the opinion that if we do more of that and less of the kind of vitriolic judgment of others, that we will be so much better off individually and collectively. And we will start to see things change at the macro level. That is my opinion.
That is a valid opinion that we're going to take forward with our audience. I appreciate you so much today, Michele. I appreciate the conversation. I feel like we could do coffee or wine one day. And I appreciate your special offer. We'll make sure that that gets highlighted when we post this. Any parting thoughts? It was a perfect segue.
No, just thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.